Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to today's session of Healthy Discussions. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping notes. The chat box and the Q&A feature are both open, so feel free to use them. You can turn on subtitles, which are auto-generated by clicking the CC button in the bottom left corner of your screen. And this session is being recorded and will be posted to Quality of Care NL's YouTube channel later this week. I'd like to acknowledge that we are joining you from the ancestral territory of the Beothuk and that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. We acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We invite everyone to offer land or territorial acknowledgements in the chat and to take a moment to reflect not only on why we offer these acknowledgements, but also ways your life and work may contribute to decolonization and reconciliation. For those who aren't familiar with Quality of Care NL, we're a research and evaluation program based at Memorial University, aimed at improving social and health outcomes in our province. Healthy Discussions is a webinar series where we have quality conversations about health, healthcare, and social systems in Newfoundland and Labrador. Our goal is to engage with you on these topics with the aim of continuing public conversations during the ongoing process of health transformation in our province. Public discussion also contributes to the growth of a learning health and social system in Newfoundland and Labrador. On the screen right now, you can see a definition of a learning health and social system as defined by Health Accord NL in its task force report. This definition might seem complicated the first time you read it, but what it really boils down to is a health and social system that continuously improves through a culture of best practice, evaluation, equity, openness, and collaboration. The system learns and gets better, resulting in better care and health for everybody. Part of the definition states that individuals and families are active participants in all elements. So by engaging in sessions like this one, by being an active participant in your own healthcare and wellness, and by talking about and acting on issues that impact us as a society, you're contributing to a learning health and social system in our province. March is Nutrition Month, and today our discussion is going to be focused on the topic of producing your own food in Newfoundland and Labrador. Joining us are Allison Snow, who is the chair of the Food Producers Forum, Dan Rubin, who is the co-founder of the Food Producers Forum, and Nick Fairbridge, who's a community engaged researcher at Memorial University. And joining them for today's discussion is Kathleen Mather, a health policy analyst at Quality of Care NL. Kathleen is also a dietitian. So Kathleen has some questions to get our conversation started, and we'll be taking questions from the audience, which you can type in the chat or the Q&A feature you can find on the bottom right corner of your screen. Since today's discussion is being recorded, you may wish to ask your question anonymously, which you can do so by using the Q&A instead of the chat. So I am going to throw it over to Kathleen now to get us started with our first questions.
Thanks, Melissa. And we've got just a little bit of a preamble to get us started, and then we'll jump right into the questions. So as Melissa mentioned, March is Nutrition Month in Canada, and so each year Dietitians of Canada develops a theme for Nutrition Month. And this year it is called Nourish to Flourish, really highlighting the connections between food and overall well-being. And we thought that was really an excellent fit for the topic today on producing your own food. We know that food plays an important role in providing us with the nutrients our bodies need to function, which allows us to go on and live our lives in ways that are important to us. Food is more than that, though, and can bring people together. We often share a meal to celebrate or mourn as a group, and specific dishes can be a way to share part of our culture with others. Gardening and growing your own food can provide an opportunity to benefit from spending time outdoors and possibly with other people if you're availing of a community garden or other shared space. There are also wonderful examples of community freezer programs in Labrador that provide individuals with access to food from the land that they may not otherwise be able to acquire themselves. Unfortunately, we also see challenges around access and affordability of the types of foods that are recommended for their nutritional quality. So fruits and vegetables provide us with fiber and various vitamins and minerals, but freshness and cost can make it challenging for people to meet the recommended intake, which is half of your plate. In Newfoundland and Labrador, where much of our produce is shipped in, transportation and delays can have a significant impact on the freshness of those items once they reach our grocery store shelves. Availability and cost of these items can also be a challenge in more rural and remote areas of the province. And there are different strategies that can help to address these concerns, some of which lie at federal or provincial levels of government, but there are also approaches that can be taken at the community and individual level, which is what we're really hoping to focus on today. So our discussion is going to highlight local food production and how to get started producing your own food. And given that fresh local food is not an option year-round in Newfoundland and Labrador, although I'm wondering if perhaps our speakers might highlight some greenhouse successes, we also want to highlight that various food preservation methods, like freezing and canning, can extend the local harvest throughout the year. Frozen and canned fruits and vegetables are also readily available at grocery stores and have a much longer shelf life than fresh produce, while still providing those important nutrients. Look for canned vegetables that are low or no sodium and canned fruits that are packed in water instead of syrup. And so with that, we're going to move on to our main discussion around producing your own food with our speakers. So my first question is for you, Allison. Can you please tell us about the Food Producers Forum? Who is involved and what are your organization's goals?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks for having us here today, and thanks to everybody for coming. Um, as Melissa said, I am the chair of the Food Producers Forum. It was originally founded by Dan and myself over a coffee at the Aquarina. But even before that, it came about as part of a outcome of a project that Dan was involved with called the Earth Sheltered Greenhouse, which is an interesting concept. It's a greenhouse that's built into a wall or a bank of earth. I'm not going to get into the details about that, but you can find lots of information on our website, foodproducersforum.com. And out of that, basically, there had been a sort of a steering session that realized there's really no connection between food producers in Newfoundland. Once upon a time, everybody kind of knew everybody in the community and shared their tools and their expertise, but these days everybody's a little bit less connected. So our goal was to kind of form a connection, a hub is like what we like to call ourselves. And we have a board of, I think, 7 or 8 members. We've kind of just had a little bit of a change up there. All volunteers, but we do have some staff who help us, as Dan mentioned, with the newsletter. And so our goal is basically to create systems or connections throughout the community. And Dan is going to tell us about a couple of projects we're currently working on that are really successful in doing that. Anybody that wants to know more can sign up for our newsletter. We send out a beautiful monthly newsletter with all kinds of information, or just drop us an email. That's about it, I think.
Wonderful. Thanks, Allison. So that moves us on to Dan. So you're the founding chair of the Food Producers Forum. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to co-founding the organization?
Yes. I've lived in Canada most of my life, but and now in Newfoundland for 23 years. But this is not where I grew up. I grew up in the United States. Hate to tell you that, but it's the truth. I grew up in California, and my dad was an amazing visual artist. I believe he was one of the great creative artists of the 20th century. He was a painter, muralist, sculptor, printmaker, inventor, writer, and a very frustrating person. Like you wouldn't want to have an argument with him because you'd lose because he was so informed about so many things. And one of the things he did was he gardened. In my book that was recently published by Boulder, my garden book, there's a picture of me on my dad's shoulders in the corn stalks in the field behind our house on a hill in Los Angeles. So I was introduced to the garden at an early age, and I've always been a gardener. So when I moved here to Newfoundland and Labrador from an 80-acre homestead in the Gulf Islands of BC, oh my God. But along the way, I'd had some really good learning. I am a retired school teacher and school principal. I have training in curriculum development, but a lot of the way I look at gardening comes from times that I've spent working with native elders. on the coast of British Columbia. Two projects focused on language regeneration, in which I was extremely fortunate to work with the elders in the Salish and Coast Tsimshian communities on the BC coast. And they're very patient, and they teach you things in the most subtle and underscored way. And little by little, you come to understand something that Indigenous people have known for thousands of years, which is that we're not in charge of the world, that we're part of it, that we're integrated into it. And to the degree that we forget that, there is real problems. And as you know, the food crisis right now in Newfoundland and Labrador and around the world is a result of our illusions and mistakes in how we look at the world. And that insight that I absorbed from working with the elders is embedded right in the structure of their language. And we look at the world through glasses made of our language pattern, and it is focused on patterns of cause and effect and ownership that are illusions. So as a gardener here in Newfoundland, and then as a seedsman, starting a seed company, and now as a garden educator and activist, I still run on those insights that I acquired from my dad, Sam, Reuben, and from the elders with whom I've worked, many of whom are still my closest friends. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dan. So we've got a coast to coast perspective from you. Melissa, I'm wondering if we might go to an audience question now.
Yeah, for sure. There were several questions submitted by our audience members when they registered to attend the webinar. And we're going to get right into it with one of them about some of the practical sides of gardening in Newfoundland and Labrador. This one's specific about using a greenhouse. And they ask, when is the best time to start seedlings in a greenhouse in Newfoundland?
Shall I take that one?
Sure.
Okay, we can all answer that because we have different experiences to bring to bear on this. But I have a small greenhouse that I built out of recycled glass. It's about 100 square feet. And I have plants out there that have overwintered, that are perennials. But I wouldn't be putting seeds or plants out there right now unless they were doubly protected under a secondary dome. Where you should be starting seeds is indoors in the warmth of your house under grow lights of some kind. And all full spectrum fluorescents work just fine, and they're cheap. And then you would be moving them out to an unheated greenhouse in about the middle or the end of April to harden off, as we say, and then to plant out into your garden or in the greenhouse. It's a little early, even though we seem to be having an early year this year.
Perfect, that's great. Kathleen, I'll let you move along with your discussion questions. And for anybody who's listening in, feel free to use the chat to type in any questions you'd like us to try and address.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So Nick, on to you. We have not forgotten about you. We're wondering about how municipal rules and regulations impact people's ability to backyard farm or homestead. And are there any steps that you can suggest that might help it address the challenges that do exist?
Absolutely. So this is actually the very topic that brought Alison, Dan, and I together. The first part brought me into their circle. So where we start on this is by acknowledging as a province that gardening of all forms that we're talking about today probably represents the largest act of mass civil disobedience happening across Canada and across our province. So the majority of our municipalities right now today, the majority, actually ban all forms of agriculture having fruit trees. They don't enforce it, and I don't think councils ever mean to, but through the history of policy and where we are as a province currently, the majority say absolutely no agriculture whatsoever in your homesteads. That means our cucumbers, they're contraband. Your grandma is probably breaking a rule somewhere. But that's where we are, and we've seen a lot of change, especially during COVID. A lot of people, millennials, kind of led that charge, but guided by others in terms of wanting to get back to it. We had the time when we were all at home. We saw an uptick, but that also meant we saw a lot of conflict between individuals trying to get into this field and the municipalities who are required to follow their own development regulations. That's why we have those municipal councils in place. So the challenge of it comes is that agriculture can be commercial. It can impact environmental health. There's public health aspects. There's reasons we put these rules in place and why we need to understand them. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that the majority of our communities do not allow agriculture in any form, including your cucumbers in your backyard. So where that starts, it starts by reading your development regulations to understand what is supposed to be happening. And then really step two is start those conversations with your council to move towards amendments. And where I have tried to champion and bring this together is that we don't need to have different rules in every community. If you drive up and down the CBS highway, what is considered one animal unit of chicken in a regulated unit of chickens actually goes from 20 to 1,000 animals just as you cross municipal borders. Those sorts of things shouldn't exist. What we need to do is hang all of it on standard best practice. If you are following standard best practice and the best possible set of codes of practice for the given animal or your horticulture, your gardens, then that's okay. We shouldn't expect any more. That's why it's standard best practice. And so getting that written into the rules, both at a municipal level, but also at a provincial level, is really where we're looking to go. And as Dan and I were chatting earlier today, there's a great group of interested people coming together, knowing there's a provincial election, a federal election, municipal elections coming up, all likely within the year. It's a great time to start pushing these issues up to the right people to say, hey, our regulation says your apple tree is illegal. How do we make sure that's not the case? And there are some simple changes at a municipal level, some regulations we'd like to propose to the province that we think is going to help, but also acknowledging and talking to each other and realizing that we're all here trying to grow food, eat on this island and throughout Labrador.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. And this kind of highlights, I see we've got a question in the chat and the question that Melissa already asked, but Dan, we have a really unique climate here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and that can be a little bit limiting at times. So do you have any suggestions for food that can be grown here and perhaps some easy to grow crops that somebody who is looking to get into this as a new beginner could start with?
Well, let me mention what I grow in my own windy, cold garden beside the sea in Pooch Cove. I grow lettuce and spinach and kale and chard and cabbage and arugula and carrots and onions and broccoli and broccolini and garlic and potatoes and Jerusalem artichoke and beets. I could go on. I also have fruit trees. In my tiny little backyard, I have 25 raised beds, and raised beds are one of the secrets to how you grow in a cold climate. I'll explain why. And in those 27 fruit trees, and bushes, I have peaches, plums, 2 kinds of cherries, 11 apple trees, kiwis, red currants, black currants, white currants, gooseberries, and grapes. And the fruit trees are selected to be adapted to our cold climate, particularly the peaches. So that rule applies to everything that you grow in your garden. I see a question there from you, Chris Carter, about planter boxes and that they didn't work very well last year. And did you start them too early? Probably the reason is the soil. So the book that I've had recently published, Sun, Seed, and Soil, talks about the 3 basics. Sun means protection from cold and wind. Seed means plant the right varieties. Not all varieties are equal. Not all types of even broccoli will grow well here. And finally, soil. And soil fertility is the big one. It's the basis of all of our food and our health, because the nutrients that are in the soil, if they can be broken down by a natural ecosystem, if we don't poison it or kill it by digging it and using herbicides or pesticides, delivers the nutrients in the soil to the plant's roots. This is a recent discovery. Only in about the last 10 or 15 years have we begun to learn about soil ecology. So as an ecologist, I'm really interested in that. And as gardeners, you should be too. So I'll circle back to the question, the real question, which is how do you grow in a cold, windy place? Well, there's several steps that can help you do this. First of all, you build protection. That could be a greenhouse or a mini greenhouse. There's lots of recycled materials that can be turned into protective structures, starting with boxes, starting with raised beds. Then soil, you fill that with healthy soil. Well, what's healthy soil? Folks, it's not the bags of mystery soil from the big box store. It's all around you to be harvested. It's seaweed and maple leaves and manure and compost. It's the natural ingredients that are produced by living things that want to return to the soil. So you collect those things. Don't throw your maple leaves away. Run a mower over them, compost them, put them back into the ground. And then what I do is I move through the yearly cycle, acknowledging that I live in a cold, windy place by starting seeds early indoors under lights, moving them out gradually, step by step. That's called hardening off. Repotting them when they grow too big for the pot they're in into a larger pot, so that by the time things get warm at the end of April and early May, I've got some honking big, healthy plants in an even larger pot ready to transplant out into the soil. But when I transplant them out, they're probably enclosed in some form of covering, a cloche or a mini greenhouse. And that covering stays on for the first part of the year and then rolls off. And then it comes back in the fall. And those steps, starting your seeds early, creating protection, and hardening off the plants that you start early can extend your growing season by up to 2 months. And there's a lot of details to explain about. That's why I've done a book. I'm not trying to promote the book. I'm very pleased that people are finding it useful because there are some other bits to explain. But basically, protection, good soil, starting your seeds early are the main strategies that I use. And also planting plants like the fruit trees and bushes and some other plants that are food plants, vegetables that are perennials that I harvest. There's one more thing to mention is that there's food growing all around us that we did not plant. There's amazing health to be gained from Jerusalem artichokes, but also from nettles and dandelions and pigweed and plants like that plant themselves. So there's so much out there to harvest once you take a close look.
Great, thanks, Dan. I mean, I know it's hard to get into everything in a short session, but I see Melissa's added a link to your book in the chat, and as well a link to a page from the Memorial University Botanical Garden on gardening. So if people are looking for a little bit more information they can access, those should hopefully help you out. And Melissa, I see you've come online again, so I'm guessing that means it's time for another audience question.
Yeah, sure. We have a couple actually. Brian asks, what are some varieties of apple, pear, and plum trees that thrive on the Avalon?
That's a question for my dear friend Brian Yeager, the natural gardener in Fairyland. And Brian, rather than naming specific varieties, there's a number of types of peaches, specifically Reliance and Frost, that do well here because they're grafted to rootstock that's tolerant of cold temperatures. There are several apple varieties that I could recommend. The best thing to do is to talk to a very knowledgeable nursery operator like the wonderful Pat Puttister at Pat's Plants in Witless Bay, who's near you on the southern shore, or to Evan Murray at Murray's Gardens. That's where I go when I want to know what will do well here. But there's also a list of those varieties in the book. The book is available from the library if you don't want to buy a copy, because I've listed some varieties of those, but I don't think I'll take a lot of time to list specific apples, pears, plums, but they're there and they're northern adapted. That's what you want.
Great, thank you. And just mentioning the library as you did, I think we have a resource to share, Kathleen, right, about seed libraries. You can actually go to certain libraries in certain communities and get seeds, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
so seems like a great way for people, like if cost is perhaps prohibitive, it's if you've got a library card, you can go to those seed libraries and pick up some seeds. And Dan, you might have some more information about how that program works, but yeah.
I'm very familiar with it because I'm related to some of the people who work on it. And it is a great source for free seeds, limited, numbers because they want to support as many gardeners as they can. A couple of things about seeds is that where do you find locally adapted seeds for vegetables? Well, you go to a local source. There's about 120 of us seeds companies in Canada. And one of the best things you can do for your garden is to join the organization called Seeds of Diversity. The website is seeds.ca. And this is a nonprofit group at the national level preserving heritage varieties, which are on the verge of disappearing. And when you join Seeds of Diversity, you get access to their catalog of about 4,000 seeds being grown by gardeners right across Canada. And you can write to those gardeners and exchange seeds with them. And probably a tomato that survives in northern Manitoba will do just fine here. And so that's one source. And then, of course, we have Gaze Seeds here, our local seed supplier, but Hope Seeds and Annapolis Seeds in Nova Scotia, Vessies in PEI. And there's an absolutely wonderful company in rural Vermont called High Mowing Seeds that I recommend strongly for locally adapted varieties.
So much information. I can see how it can be really easy for somebody to get overwhelmed or not really know how to start, which would lead me to
Yeah,
my next
for
audience
sure.
question. Someone says that they have a 5-acre property in Portugal Cove, but they say, where do I start? I find myself falling into paralysis by analysis, which I thought was a nice little phrase to sum up that feeling. Do you have
Well,
any recommendations for how he or she could get started with such a large property?
it can be very discouraging. You try something and it doesn't work and the plants die. And then you go, oh God, I'm no good at this. Look at my thumb, it's not green. Uh, d- don't worry. Take it easy, relax. Because the thing that I love most about doing my workshops, I call it creating the year-round garden, is the smiles at the end of the day. And I lean toward people and I say, you didn't know when you took this workshop that you were joining a conspiracy to grow food because there's a learning curve and you have to be patient with yourself and learn as you go. And that's why I wrote the garden book. That's why I do the workshops. I will be doing more of these workshops in April and May. You can write to me at info@perfectlyperennial.ca and sign up for the workshops. They will be happening this year here at the Mercy Center in St. John's on Mount Sion Road. So the general response to the question is, don't worry, try stuff. Don't worry about making mistakes and do it little by little. I mentioned in our backyard, we have 25 raised beds. Well, guess what? We didn't build those all in the first year. We built a couple and then we did another thing and then something worked and then something didn't work. You just take it step by step. If you have 5 acres in Portugal Cove, that's a lot of land. So start small, build a couple of raised beds. And I describe in my book how you do that. Make them no more than 3 feet wide. Fill them with really good soil. Where do you get that? Order it by the bag or have by the truckload from Carew Services in Portugal Cove. And they will give it to you by the bag or deliver it. It's made with composted fish waste and topsoil and peat, moss, and fill the box with really good soil, plant or start your seeds indoors, and something will work, something won't. And then you'll learn, and then you'll go on. Start small and build up.
That is great advice. Kathleen, I'll let you go back to our pre-planned questions.
Yeah, and this actually is a really great segue into my question for Allison. So we've talked a little bit about somebody who has an abundance of space, but do you have any advice for people who are interested in growing their own food, but maybe don't have a lot of or any outdoor space to work with in their home?
There's so many options available these days. I actually had to make a list because I said, there's, I have to kind of narrow it down. But the couple of things I wanted to mention about things we've just discussed is number one, know your hardiness zone. So if you're planting anywhere anywhere in the world, but in Newfoundland, there's several zones. The West Coast is much warmer than the East Coast. Up north is colder, etc. So look it up, know your zone that you're going to be planting. And any seeds company can tell you that as well. I also wanted to mention, we've talked about the Botanical Garden. We are in conjunction with them and some other organizations hosting a Seedy Saturday event, April 19th at the Botanical Garden. So that is a great way to talk to gardeners. There's several workshops, there's kids activities, and there will be a variety of free seeds. There are gently used tools, books, and all kinds of cuttings. It's just a really fun day to come and hang out and know about all things gardening. Finally, I'll mention the foodproducersforum.com website has hundreds and hundreds of pages on every topic you could want to know about. You can search by crop, you can search by techniques, you can find a lot of information there as well. So back to your
It's
question.
an online encyclopedia of gardening.
Yes,
available right now today. Yeah.
largely written by Mr. Dan Rubin.
Well,
So,
some of it. Crowdsourced.
So growing your food indoors is as easy as it can be. You can take a small pot and put some herbs on your windowsills. You can use containers inside or outside. You can, you've probably all seen the carrots grown in buckets, 5-gallon buckets that are amazing. You can grow under grow lights in your home, as Dan mentioned. There are small kits now you can get at pretty much any box store, big store around that are self-contained. So they're hydroponic with a grow light on top. They come with seeds. So it's as simple as using the medium they provide and turn the light on and your stuff will grow. As Dan mentioned, if you're going to go on a deck or something like that, you might want to think about covering your pots and things certain times of the year that will extend their lives. What else, Dan? Have I forgotten anything?
No, that's
Hanging containers.
Yeah, growing in containers. I have a whole chapter in my book about that. The key is good drainage and really good soil. And you can build that soil, as I mentioned, with the ingredients that are all around you. I didn't mention fish waste and seaweed, but seaweed and anything from the ocean is really great because plants need not only just the major nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but they also need micronutrients that exist in the organisms that live in the ocean, which concentrate them. And that's like selenium and copper and iron and manganese and magnesium and those things. So good soil and good drainage for container gardens.
Just talking about the sea, if I could mention, Kathleen, one interesting fact I learned from Dan, I believe. We have the cabbage moth around if anybody's tried to grow cabbages or cruciferous type vegetables. And apparently sprinkling seawater on them repels those moths. So it's another little use of the sea.
And I, in turn, learned that from an elder, a neighbor in Butch Cove when I walked down to the bottom of the loop and there were these gorgeous cabbage and I can't protect my cabbages. I go, what did you do? He said, well, I goes down to the chuck and I gets the seawater and I sprinkles it once a week. That's what we were saying about getting started. Don't be afraid. You're going to be learning all the time.
I do have a question, and I see there's maybe a similar, maybe somebody else has a similar thought as I do around using seaweed. I'm assuming there's a bit of an odor that might occur with that. Is there a way to kind of reduce that or kind of manage your seaweed if you're trying to add that to your soil?
Seaweed doesn't smell very badly. If you get it in the spring from the beaches and it's rain washed, it'll be fine. Will it smell a little oceany at first? Yes, it will, and it'll dry out. So you can layer it on top, you can dry it out and crumble it in. However you use it, it's fine, but it brings really critical micronutrients that plants need. So highly recommended putting seaweed into the soil in your garden. It shouldn't smell too badly.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Nick, moving back to you, what is the relationship between local food production and community health? And how can communities begin to rebuild the capacity to produce and share local food?
Absolutely. So I'll even refer right back to your introduction. I think you had a fantastic when you kind of framed it in. So rather than rehashing all of that, anyone can go back and replay, hopefully when this recording. But I'll say, yeah, it is a critical connection. And we keep expanding. So I'll just take a moment to say here in the Faculty of Medicine and throughout Memorial University, we're still in the process right now of trying to figure out how to train the next generation of health practitioners, not just in community health, but in planetary health. So kind of stepping back that one layer to say, well, our individual health as people through the social determinants, through community health, we can't separate it anymore from the health of our local environment. So as we're training our health practitioners how to be advocates, how to do health protection, health promotion, all of these sorts of discussions have to be involved. We are still trying to figure out that how. I was actually just saying to Dan that we might be inviting him out because our med school is trying to figure out what should we do about it. And events like this are fantastic to get the community perspective, the partners who know what's going on the ground to bring it all together. But as for the second part, the core, how do we rebuild? So what I found very powerful here is the community connections, both in the nonprofit world, making the connections to Dan, to Allison, to other community groups, but even within my own community, we started with the recreation committee, and that's kind of been my angle in through everything else, knowing that there are a lot of constraints at times within municipal development regulations. Most municipal rec committees or recreational groups they have that tie-in, they have that support already of the municipality. And so if you can convince the municipality that gardening, starting at a community level, is also a branch of recreation, there are so many grants, there are so many opportunities to grow those community gardens that can turn into something larger. Our own experience, so I'm in Harbor Main, Chapels Cove, and Lakeview, fantastic community. I've noticed I saw Fairyland in the chat as another community highly welcoming. So it's great to see these communities starting to turn and open up to this. But in our case, our town was always very open to it at a regulation level, and that allowed us to step in at a rec committee. We started a community garden that turned into a community farmstead. Much like what Dan was saying, you start small. It started with me 16 raised boxes that I was drilling up by hand, not overly great with my tools, but it's yet another skill we developed over the last few years. Built those community boxes, and now we have 70 raised boxes. Now we have a 125 tree fruit orchard. We now have an 800 square foot all season greenhouse, and we've actually gone from I think we started with about $3,000 through a recreation grant, and now we have a $500,000 investment through the Local Food Infrastructure Fund and all sorts of great sponsors, helping build the Harbor Farmstead, which is now operating. And all of that brought the municipality on board. They've been fantastic partners. They see the value in it. And now we're growing it with the town involved, instead of so many other communities where they have to kind of edge out and say, no, agriculture doesn't belong here. And it brings everyone together. So where you can, find those community partners, find those other gardeners who are most likely, breaking the law along with you, come all together and find ways to grow something within the bounds of regulation and law where possible.
I'd like to comment on that briefly as well. Allison did a really good job of describing how we came about as an organization and how we're organized and how multicultural we are in terms of our representation on our board and certainly within our staff. I work with people every day from 4 different countries in our office. And but because we are an information hub, we are a connector and catalyst, we've been raising money for projects. We've raised over $600,000 for various community projects in our first 6 years, which is wonderful and scary. Because then we've been responsible for dispersing that money, and we've been to building greenhouses and building root cellars and equipping wash and pack stations for farms and buying farm equipment and supporting indigenous communities and food education centers at 15 sites right across the province through the project that I lead, which is called the Provincial Food Network. And the big learning for me is I thought this was about food, and it turns out it's really about community, what Nick was talking about. Now, our group will be participating in a project called Tomorrow's Towns as members of a group working with the NL municipalities. But in your community, you need to get active and ask the people at the municipal level to become supporters rather than discouragers of local food. Because the challenges for a single gardener can be overwhelming. Climate, local rules, whatever. And where the real potential for feeding ourselves and keeping our health going at the community level is at the community level through collaboration and bringing people with different skill sets together. And our whole experience over the last 6 years has been an amazing roller coaster ride. And the stuff that I could tell you about if I had the time, that would blow you away. The 14-year-old in Kings Point that started the whole thing in that community, and so on and so forth. The power lies in community.
Wonderful. Then thanks both you and Nick. And I see Melissa's been busy in the chat sharing some links, but there's some information on various community garden options and as well the rolling fund from the government to support community garden programs. So certainly plenty of ways to get involved at that community level. And Melissa, do we have another audience question?
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple of questions about greenhouse growing. Again, what are the best ways to add and improve heat retention in my greenhouse and extend the season a little bit? And they throw out some examples like heat mats or soil cables or insulation, a heater. What would you recommend there? And someone else is asking that they say they're new to greenhouse growing and wondering if there's courses that they could access, or I guess otherwise other resources online perhaps.
Maybe I could answer that question in terms of the home greenhouse, and Nick, you might jump in on the larger scale one, like the one that you've built for your community farm in Harbor, Maine. So my whole experience with greenhouses is that this is a really great example of how we're caught up in myths and illusions in our whole society. We have illusions about money, we have illusions about lots of things, but the big myth about a greenhouse is that it's a building that's glass or plastic on all sides. Well, folks, that's a really stupid design for Newfoundland and Labrador or anywhere in the north, because the sun comes in the south side and the heat goes out the north side. So what you need to do is think of your greenhouse as a kind of a sun catcher, a basket to catch the sun. And you make the south side transparent and you insulate the heck out of the north side. The north wall should not be clear. And if you orient your greenhouse running east and west, or you have a building that you can build it against the south side of the building, then you have this sun catcher, I will call it. Now, once you do that, then heating it becomes much easier. The design that gave rise to Food Producers Forum, that was developed with engineering undergraduate students at Memorial University. What a wonderful crew. Is a building, I call it a greenhouse, with its arse in the earth. It is a building that's backed into a hillside with a back wall made of 8-inch thick concrete, 24 feet long, 8 feet high. And then on the front, it's polycarbonate plastic for the sun to come in from the south. Now, when that sunlight hits the back wall, it will stay warm, and the back wall will do 90% of the heating. So even before you use heating mats or heaters or burn anything, if you can design a greenhouse that has its back insulated, you're ahead of the game. I've got to plug in my Mac. It's about to die. Let me go away and get the cord for that. I'll hand it off to Nick.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. I think when I started into this years ago, getting my own greenhouse, I thought I was trying to capture the sun, and that's not the case. We're trying to capture heat, and that's exactly it. You plan on capturing the heat. So heat sinks also work really well here. So think water that you're not even going to use on your plant. You just have a giant bin of it on your back wall, and its whole job is to just capture that heat as it comes in. And then as the sun goes down and everything cools off, it radiates it back out. What Dan alluded to is we follow the University of Minnesota deep winter greenhouse design. That's what we're testing out on the island. But it's the same idea. There's glass on only one side, the side that faces south, insulated on the rest. And what we're testing out as to how well it works here is different, as we call it a climate battery. But the idea is throughout the day, you capture the heat at the very top and you pump it down into the earth underneath, into gravel, or in our case, it's going to be in floor and even in soil heating, so that you just keep capturing that heat. And so the goal is to capture the heat and at times get rid of the heat when you need to, whether that's down into the earth or out to the sides. In our case, so this is just outside of town, our greenhouse in the last season, when we closed everything off and we're trying to bake it off, kill everything in it, it managed 54 degrees Celsius inside, just naturally, no heat. And of course, outside, it's not getting warmer than, I think 25 was our top day last year. So capturing the heat, controlling the heat, that's actually what we're doing with the greenhouse. The sun comes and goes on its own. If it doesn't come up, we have other problems. It's the heat that we're trying to get.
And the thing I would add to what Nick just said is that the real problem in a greenhouse is shedding heat in the hot time of the year. And there's ways you can ameliorate that by enclosing things in such a way that the sun is screened out. But the climate battery is part of the design that we developed with the crew in engineering at Memorial. A great example of that in Flat Rock at the homestead in Flat Rock is the one that David Goodyear has built. And he was able to run right through the snow event that we call Snowmageddon, heating his greenhouse to 10 degrees Celsius so he could grow food all winter long at a cost of $5 a month. And what that $5 went to do was to run two little fans, 1.5 horsepower fans, feeding air from the peak of the greenhouse into a tube and then down into the ground, moving it through the soil, through weeping tile tubes, allowing the heat and moisture from the air in the heated greenhouse to percolate into the soil. It turns out, and this again is this University of Minnesota research that gave rise to this knowledge, it turns out that it takes up to 4 years to fully load the soil beneath the building. So this year we are building 3 greenhouses, one to lock up in Mary's Harbor, Labrador, one at the community garden in Kings Point, and the third one is being built for Knotty Pine Farm in Apiary in Port Blandford. And they all have these system of tubes under the ground. So you dig a great humongous hole, you put the tubes in, you fill it with gravel, you build a building on top, you install the fans, and then you've got a building that can grow food year round. But let me also mention the fact that we built a much smaller version of a greenhouse with walls that lean out and polycarbonate on the top, plywood below, by constructing frames down a 24-foot length. And we built what we call our sun catcher greenhouse, a much simpler version, no underground heating, here at the Mercy Center, and the cost for the materials for about 200 square foot greenhouse was about $5,000. So the options are there, and it's worth some exploring if you have a greenhouse that you want to operate in the way we've described, insulated.
It's so cool to hear about all the different ways that you guys are exploring how to really manage that in our climate, where you would, right off the hop, just think, no, we can't grow things here. We live on a rock. It's windy. It's salty. It's got to be difficult, but it's actually totally possible.
That's the number one myth that we have to break, because it is simply not true. We used to be the most healthy and most self-sufficient for food province in Canada. We're now at the bottom of the list, and that's because we forgot what people at Outports always knew, that you would harvest and grow food in your own community, and then you'd have that food security. And we can rebuild that. We're actually in the process of rebuilding that now at the provincial level.
For sure. Before we've got about 10 minutes or so left, so I want to dig into a couple of more audience questions. We haven't talked much about pests, except that one cabbage moth, I think you said it was. So I'm wondering, someone asked specifically about black knot impacting their plum trees. I'm wondering if there are any other types of pests common in Newfoundland and Labrador that people have to deal with, and if you have any strategies for dealing with them. Open to anybody.
Well, I think one of the hardest ones are the invasive plants like knotweed and goutweed, for which we don't have really a great solution other than what my friend Sean Dawson says, which is you can eat them in the spring. But one of the ones that keeps coming up here, and I noticed a question about it, is black knot. So black knot is those crusty black and brown lumps that you get on plum trees and cherry trees, members of the drupe family. And I have plums trees that I planted, and yes, they do get black knot. So what I do is that I sterilize my pruners. I go out and I find the branches with the lumps on them. I cut them off. I do not burn them because that spreads the spores if they're not fully engulfed in flames. I put them in the bag and they go out with the landfill garbage. But if you keep persistent in your pruning out of the black knot, your trees will retain their health. And I have harvested 65 pounds of plums from 2 trees that, had black knot, but I keep cutting it out. So that's kind of the answer to black knot, because it's there in the wild pin cherries. It's being spread everywhere. You do have to battle with it. So that is one pest to mention. It's a fungal disease.
The other one I'd like to highlight with pests, because I see it come up a lot talking about community composting, and there's the resistance against entering into community compost is people immediately say, well, what about the rats? What about all these animals that we bring in from the compost? And I guess what I want to stress is, well, they're there anyway. And our current system of putting our waste out in a thin black bag or clear bag in some communities, the pests are getting into it anyway, and they're more attracted through that small garbage system, ripping our garbage apart and making our communities full of trash, than they would be in an organized system of closed bins, closed vessel compost. I think we could actually reduce our overall concern with pests. And yet it keeps coming up as one of the first barriers. Oh, but it'll bring in pests. Well, they live here anyway. And as Dan said, a big part of it is learning to live with the environment that they have. The rats will be here. So let's plan on them being here and then build our systems anyway to do what we need to do.
That makes perfect sense. Someone asks about filling your above ground boxes and wanted to know a good ratio of compost, soil, manure, any other specific ingredients. What would you recommend for a soil mix if you weren't buying it already from a local provider, let's say?
Sorry, I was typing. Could you say that again?
Sure. They're looking for a good ratio of compost, soil, manure when they're preparing to fill their above ground boxes.
Simple answer, more of everything. And I want to touch briefly on the key to regenerative agriculture in our gardens, which is not digging. And God, do I love to dig up the beds in the spring, but you're evicting the soil ecology when you do that. And the alternative is mulching. That is to say, layering on top of the soil, once you have it free of weeds, with seaweed and maple leaves that have been, and compost and manure. As much of all of that, as much organic material as you can put in the soil, the healthier your soil will be. And the less you can disturb it, the healthier your soil will be and the happier your plants will be.
Great. I'm just scanning to see if I can squeeze in one more question before we go back to Kathleen. Someone's asking specifically about tomato plants. How can you make tomato plants more fruitful?
Well, tomato plants are heavy feeders, and they like a high pH soil. So a bit of lime can help, but not too much, because like potatoes, they don't like to be, unlike cabbages, which love lots of dolomite lime in the soil. You can put on too much for the tomatoes. But tomatoes also need a really good source of phosphorus. So that's where the organic materials or a handful of balanced fertilizer when you plant into the hole can help them get started. But basically, the key is rich, healthy, organic soil. Now, tomatoes are a semi-tropical plant. They can grow perennial year after year if they're in the right warm place. So what you want to do when you plant them out, particularly in the spring, is to protect them from wind. And you can do that in a variety of ways. I won't get into the details, but protection from wind is key for tomatoes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dan. Kathleen, I'm going to send it back to you to finish us up with the last few questions.
Okay, so I've got a question for everybody. So maybe I'll just go around one at a time. But my question is, if you have one piece of advice you would give to somebody who is interested in growing food or backyard farming in Newfoundland and Labrador, and maybe Allison, I'll start with you.
Sure. Something I was thinking about earlier was companion planting. So some plants do well next to others and some don't. It's a very simple concept, and there's all kinds of information on our website and other websites. It's good to know which ones don't work well together, but something about the person who said, they tried a garden last year and it didn't work. Well, we've all done that, and it depends on our weather. Sometimes we have a nice hot and dry summer, sometimes we have a very cold and wet summer. But there are different plants that thrive in both of those conditions. So you can, if you have a wet start to your summer, grow cucumbers and cabbages and things that like that. And then as the summer goes on and gets warmer, you can grow, use quick growing seeds, like the lowest time you can get. You can grow more hot weather varieties.
Great, thanks. And what about you, Nick? Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to follow the exact same wording and theme, but with a different meaning, companion planting. And it's what Dan and I were talking about. Find companions that want to go out and plant with you, or other people, or community partners. Everything from the opportunity to share seeds all across the country, as Dan talked about the seed sharing program. Just swap, if you get 50 pounds of zucchini that you can't possibly eat, there's always someone in the community probably who could, and perhaps they have a load of apples. Just make sure they're gifts and not a barter, otherwise the CRA comes knocking. But build in those community plans, right? Talk to your local recreation committees, find others involved, because there's just a wealth of resources there to use.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dan, what's your one piece of advice?
I really am following the same theme as Nick, that it's all about learning. It's all about community. It's all about making mistakes and taking chances. Start small and then expand as you learn about what you're doing. And the resources that we've been sharing on this presentation, our own website, Seeds of Diversity website, the Botanical Garden, we're all in this together, folks. And if we can get it into our heads that we're part of something, we're part of the ecosystem, we're part of the garden. And if we walk around the garden with our eyes open and our nose working and our ears open, we will learn things. The garden will teach us. And most of the things that I've learned from the garden. So the garden is your teacher. I would leave it there.
Perfect, thank you. And I know we've certainly had lots of resources put in the chat, and you've mentioned a couple of the projects that are kind of events that are upcoming that people can find more information about up on the Food Producers Forum website. Is that a fair place to, and by joining your newsletter? And maybe, seeing that we are right at time now, I will pass it over to you, Melissa, to close us up.
Perfect. I would say my biggest takeaway from this is that there are so many very rich and well-informed local resources out here that we can rely on, because that's the hard part. You can Google something, but you're like, is that going to be applicable to Newfoundland and Labrador? Is that going to work here? I'm not sure. So it's great to know that there are such great local resources with the experience growing here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and the links that we put in the chat are definitely super helpful. If anybody wants to ask a question or find out about a resource or something that we mentioned today, you can always shoot Quality of Care NL or myself an email, and we'll find that appropriate link or connect you with the right resource. So I want to thank Allison, Dan, Nick, and Kathleen for leading us through a great discussion on today's topic and to celebrate Nutrition Month. all across Canada. I will say that you're going to see a very short post-event survey on your screen after we end the webinar, and we'd really appreciate you providing any feedback plus ideas for future healthy discussions topics. A couple of people asked if this recording will be available later because there was such great information shared, and it will be posted on Quality of Care NL's YouTube channel, which you can link to from our website. So a big thank you to everybody who joined us online to listen and participate in our discussion. And I've already reminded you about the recording. So that's it. Thank you everybody for joining us today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you.
Thank you, Melissa and
Thank you,
Kathleen.
guys.
And Kathleen, yes.